He could not have said afterwards whether he had remained 2 or 3 hours, or whether it had been days near the hut. When at last the enchantment released him from its thrall, and he stole noiselessly through the ferns again on his return, seeking his way out of the forest, and finally reaching the grazing grounds and the herd. He did so unconsciously, for his soul was still bewitched, and the spell was only completely broken when one of the herdsmen called out his name. The latter received him with violent abuse on account of his long absence, but Dasse looked at him with such wide-open eyes and in such astonishment that he might not have understood a word he said. The herdsman fell silent when he noticed the unusual far-distant look on the boy's eyes and his arrogant behavior. "Where have you been then, my dear?" he asked after a while. "Have you seen a god, or perhaps a demon?" "I was in the forest," replied Dasse. "I went there to look for honey, but I forgot all about it when I saw a man, a hermit, who was sitting deep in meditation or in prayer. When I saw how his face shone, I had to stay and look at him for a long time. I must go back this evening and take him a gift, for he is a holy man." "Yes, do that by all means," said the cowherd. "Take some milk and some sweet butter. One must always respect holy men and bring them gifts." "But how shall I address him?" "There is no need to address him, Dasse. Simply bend down before him and place the gifts at his feet. No more is necessary." This Dasse did. It was some time before he could find the spot again, and when he did so, the clearing before the hut was empty. He did not dare to enter the hut, but placed his gifts on the ground before the entrance and withdrew. Every evening, for as long as the herd remained in the neighborhood, he brought offerings, and also went once more during the day to find the sage deeply immersed in meditation as before. Nor was the Lord to receive a ray of holy man's strength and happiness as a favored onlooker any the less powerful on this occasion. And long after he had left the neighborhood, he had helped to drive the herd in search of new pasture. He could not forget his experience in the forest. As is the way with boys, he often yielded to daydreams when he was alone, and at times he saw himself as a hermit and yoga adept. However, as the years went by, the memory began to pale, especially as he was rapidly growing into a sturdy youth who took a vivid pleasure in wrestling and in games with the boys of his own age. Yet there always remained in his soul a slight shimmering presentiment to the effect that his lost princehood and kinship might one day be replaced by the dignity and power of yoga. One day, when the herd had arrived in the neighborhood of a town, one of the herdsmen brought the news that a mighty feast was about to take place. The old Prince Ravana, who had lost his pristine strength and grown infirm, had appointed a day upon which his son Nala should succeed him. Dasse wished to take part in this feast in order to see, for the first time since his exile, the town of his childhood, of which hardly a trace of memory remained in his soul. To hear the music and see the procession of nobles, to see once more the world of the townsmen and the great whom he had so often heard described in legends and fairy tales, for he knew that once in a previous age, just as in a legend or fairy tale, this world had also been his own. The herdsman had received an order to deliver a consignment of butter to the court for the feast day sacrifice, and Dasse was one of the 3 who had been chosen by the chief herdsman for this task. In order to deliver their butter, they entered the court on the previous evening and were received by Vasudeva, for it was he who was in charge of the sacrifice. The old Brahmin did not, however, recognize the boy. The 3 herdsmen took part in the feast with the greatest gusto. As this early hour of the morning, they already saw the beginnings of the sacrifice conducted by the Brahmins. The gleaming golden butter, licked by the fire, was transformed into high-rising flames, and the fat-drenched smoke, acceptable to the thrice 10 gods, rose high up into the infinite. In the procession, they saw elephants bearing golden-roofed palanquins, upon which the riders sat, saw the flower-bedecked royal car and the young Raja Nala, and heard the throbbing beat of drums. Everything was magnificent and splendid, and also a little ridiculous, or so it appeared to the young Dasa. He was enchanted and intoxicated by the deafening noise. The cars and the caparisoned horses, by all the splendor and ostentatious extravagance, and was especially charmed by the dancing girls who danced before the prince's car with limbs slender and wiry as lotus stalks. He was astonished at the size and beauty of the town. But in spite of it all, and in the midst of his joyous intoxication, he nevertheless observed everything with the sober eyes of the herdsman, who, in his heart, is wont to despise the town dweller. It did not occur to him that he was actually the firstborn, for no memory of this remained, and that here, before his eyes, his stepbrother Nala was being anointed, consecrated, and fitted with himself, while he himself, Dasa, ought to have been riding in his place in the flower-covered car. In any case, this young Nala displeased him intensely, for he seemed to Dasa to be stupid and ill-tempered in his spoiled luxury, to be puffed up with unbearable vanity and self-adoration. He would very much have liked to play a trick on this youngster who was acting the princeling and teach him a good lesson. But he quickly forgot this and all that there was to see, hear, laugh at, and enjoy. The women of the town were comely and had saucy, exciting looks and movements. Their language was no less so, and the 3 herdsmen heard many a word that rang for a long time in their ears. But these words were not said without a trace of mockery, for a similar sense of animosity applied in the case of the townspeople towards the herdsmen. They both despised each other, and yet the strong, handsome youths, nourished upon milk and cheese and living almost the entire year under the open sky, pleased the townswomen exceedingly. On his return from the feast, Dasa had suddenly become a man. He now courted the women and had many serious fights and wrestling matches with the older youths. The herd came in due course to another neighborhood with flat meadows and marshes where reeds and bamboo canes grew in profusion. Here he saw a maiden named Pravati and was seized with an all-consuming love for her. She was the daughter of a farmer, and Dasa's passion for her was so great that he forgot all else in his preoccupation with possessing her. When after some time the herd left the neighborhood once more, he ignored his comrades' warnings and advice, took leave of them and of his herdsman's life, which he had loved so much, and took up a sedentary life among the farmers. He succeeded in winning Pravati for his wife, and thenceforward administered his father-in-law's millet and rice fields, helped in the mill and with the wood cutting, and built his wife a hut from mud and bamboo trunks, to which he retired with her. It must indeed have been a powerful urge that could influence a young man to renounce his former friends, companions, and customs, to alter his life, and to take over the unenviable position of son-in-law among strangers. But so great was Pravati's beauty, so ensnaring the inner warmth and passion that radiated from her body and her countenance, that Dasa was blind to everything else. He surrendered himself completely to her, and in fact found his greatest happiness in her arms. Many tales have been told of gods and holy men who have been enchanted by an alluring woman and have remained with her for days, moons, and years on end in close embrace, joined together in molten lust and oblivious to all other activities. Thus Dasa might have desired his own fate to be, but other things were in store for him, and his happiness was not of long duration. It lasted for perhaps a year, but even during this time he did not enjoy complete happiness, for it was marred by many things, such as the burdensome demands of his father-in-law, the envenomed shafts of his brother-in-law, and the caprices of his young wife. But whenever he repaired to his couch, all these irritations were forgotten and compensated for, because he found such incredible sweetness in caressing her slender limbs and young body, where the garden of passion bloomed with 1,000 blossoms, scents, and shadows. His happiness was hardly a year old when a day of unrest and turmoil broke over the whole settlement. Messengers on horseback appeared, announcing that the young Raja was arriving on a visit with men, horses, and baggage trains to hunt in the neighborhood. Tents were hastily erected, and there was a great sound of horses and of horn blowing. Dasa did not trouble himself in the least about all this, but continued to tend the mill, to work the fields, and he avoided the huntsmen and the courtiers. One day, however, upon returning to the hut, he found that his wife was not there, although he had strictly forbidden her to go out. He felt a contraction in his heart and presentiment of impending misfortune. Hastening to his father-in-law's hut, he learned that Pravati was not with him either, and that no one seemed to have seen anything of her. The gnawing fear in his heart increased. He searched the cabbage gardens and the fields round about, and for 2 whole days wandered this way and that, searching his own and his father-in-law's hut 1,000 times,